The PlayStation 1 era was full of innovation, developers experimenting fearlessly, trying things no one else dared. But not every game found its audience. Some flopped, not because they lacked quality, but because they were misunderstood, mistimed, or simply too bold for their day. Years later, these so-called failures are remembered as visionary, games that shaped genres quietly, influencing everything that came after. Today, we're revisiting some of these titles that prove brilliance doesn't always sell. If you end up liking the content, please subscribe for more, and I'd appreciate it if you give it a thumbs up and tell me what you think down below. Love to hear it. Vibe Ribbon is a minimalist rhythm game from Masaya Matsuura. The creator of Parappa the Rapper was one of the boldest experiments on the PS1. The visuals were just white vector lines on a black screen. The gameplay had jumping, flipping, and dodging shapes in rhythm. It looked more like a student art project than a retail game. But beneath that simplicity was brilliance. It could generate levels from any CD you inserted into your PlayStation. Pop in your favorite album, and suddenly, you were playing your music. That concept alone was revolutionary. Long before games like Audio Surf or Beat Hazard turned songs into gameplay, this was doing it with elegance and personality. You control Vibri, a hand-drawn rabbit navigating rhythm-based obstacles. Every beat translates into movement, every melody into challenge. It's pure procedural music visualization years ahead of its time. Its minimalist art style was part of its genius. With no textures or colors, it relied on rhythm, flow, and silhouette to evoke feeling. It wasn't cinematic in visuals, but it was cinematic in rhythm. The game moves like music itself, fluid, unpredictable, and alive. But it was never built for mass appeal. No flashy graphics, no big-name marketing, no easy difficulty curve. It was experimental, niche, and proud of it. Commercially, Vibe Ribbon bombed, so much that it barely released outside Japan and Europe. But critics and designers later praised it as visionary. It showed how interactivity could become art through sound and motion alone. It flopped because it refused to entertain the way other games did. It wanted to express. And decades later, that makes it unforgettable. Vibe Ribbon wasn't a failure. It was a pioneer that arrived long before the world was ready to dance along. When Alundra hit the PlayStation in 1997, it should have been a hit. It had gorgeous pixel art, clever puzzles, and the kind of emotional storytelling that set it apart from the typical fantasy adventure. But it released at a time when 3D gaming was the new obsession, and hand-drawn 2D worlds were suddenly seen as old-fashioned. As a result, it was overlooked by the masses, an artistic, challenging, and deeply human game left behind in the rush toward polygons. Today, it's remembered as one of the PS1's most mature and thought-provoking masterpieces. Often called the Dark Zelda, this isn't about saving a princess or collecting trinkets. It's about exploring pain, dreams, and the human mind. You play as a dreamwalker who can enter the subconscious of others to help them confront their inner demons. What begins as a heroic fantasy slowly morphs into a psychological drama about loss, faith, and despair. Characters die, villages crumble, and hope fades. But the writing never feels bleak for shock's sake. It's introspective, philosophical, and daringly emotional for its time. The game's cinematic touch lies in its storytelling and atmosphere. The isometric camera and expressive sprite animation give every movement weight and personality. The use of music, melancholic flutes, somber strings, sets a tone that feels closer to a tragic film score than an RPG soundtrack. Dialogue scenes are simple, yet full of emotional nuance, carried by silence and pacing as much as words. You feel every loss and triumph, as if you're watching it unfold on screen. It flopped commercially for two reasons. It was too hard and too heavy. The puzzles were brutal, the combat demanding, and the tone emotionally draining. Players expecting a light-hearted adventure were met with existential dread and philosophical depth. But those who stayed found something that respected the player's intelligence and heart in equal measure. When Klonoa Door to Phantomile released in 1997, it came and went with barely a whisper. A side-scrolling platformer in an era obsessed with 3D graphics, it didn't stand a chance commercially. But anyone who played it knows it was pure magic. This was a masterclass in emotional storytelling disguised as a simple adventure. You played as a small, cat guy exploring dreamlike worlds filled with color, warmth, and an undercurrent of sadness. By the time the credits rolled, it had delivered one of the most heartbreaking twists of the entire PlayStation generation. The game's charm lies in its tone. It's gentle, inviting, and innocent, but never naive. Every level feels like a dreamscape brought to life, with backdrops that shimmer like watercolor paintings and a soundtrack that shifts effortlessly between whimsy and melancholy. The 2.5D perspective, where you move on a 2D plane through 3D environments, gave it a cinematic depth few platformers have achieved. The camera pans and rotations make you feel like you're guiding a character through a miniature film set. Beautiful, emotional, and perfectly framed. Then there's the story, a deceptively simple tale about friendship, loss, and memory that quietly devastates you by the end. Unlike most platformers, Klonoa didn't rely on humor or spectacle. It spoke softly and carried meaning. That subtlety cost its sales, but won at hearts for decades. Today, it's seen as a masterpiece of tone and atmosphere. A game that proved emotional storytelling didn't need dialogue or realism, just sincerity. It didn't fail because it was weak. It failed because it was gentle in a loud era. It's rare for a commercial disappointment to redefine storytelling in games, but Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver did exactly that. Released in 1999, it launched to critical praise but middling sales, overshadowed by flashier, more accessible action titles. Yet those who played it knew they were experiencing something revolutionary. It didn't just tell a story, it performed one. Gothic, operatic, and unrelentingly tragic, it blended solid dialogue with cinematic presentation in a way no other game of the era dared. You play as Raziel, a betrayed vampire resurrected by an ancient god to take revenge on his former master, Kain. That premise sounds simple, but the execution is anything but. The writing is pure theatrical poetry, dense, reflective, and beautifully delivered. Every exchange between Raziel and Kain feels like a duel between philosophies. The voice acting, particularly Michael Bell's haunting performance as Raziel, remains among the finest ever recorded for a game. You could close your eyes and think you're listening to a stage play. Cinematically, its seamless transition between gameplay and cutscenes, its sweeping camera angles, and its haunting world design made it feel far ahead of its time. The decaying architecture of Nosgoth is more than a backdrop. It's visual storytelling, a symbol of spiritual rot and decay. Even the game's signature mechanic, the ability to shift between the material and spectral realms, feels like a filmic metaphor for death and rebirth. So why did it flop? A brutal combination of poor marketing, tough competition, and technical compromises. The game was meant to be larger and more intricate, but content was cut to meet deadlines. Despite this, what remained was a masterpiece of tone, voice, and vision. Soul Reaver proved games could be literary, cinematic, and profound, all at once. Square was known for epic RPGs in the 90s, so when they suddenly dropped a side-scrolling shooter in 1997, most players didn't know what to make of it. Einhander was sleek, modern, and completely unlike anything else the company had made. It flopped commercially, overshadowed by its own publishers' giants like FF7, but today it's remembered as one of the most stylish and forward-thinking shoot-'em-ups ever made. It didn't just play well, it looked and felt like a cinematic event long before that was a selling point. From the first mission, it feels like you're piloting through a sci-fi war film. The camera doesn't stay fixed like traditional shooters. It tilts, pans, and tracks your ship with dramatic precision, emphasizing scale and motion. The environments aren't static backdrops. They move with you, transforming as explosions ripple through the scene. Every moment feels choreographed, like a meticulously timed action sequence. Even the transitions between stages are seamless, giving it the pacing of a relentless film that never cuts to black. The gameplay is just as bold. Instead of traditional power-ups, this lets you steal weapons from fallen enemies, switching between cannons and machine guns mid-battle. It's fast, tactical, and endlessly satisfying. The soundtrack pulses with mechanical beats and electronic tension, industrial energy that perfectly matches the game's cold, dystopian aesthetic. You can almost feel the vibration of steel and fire beneath every note. It demanded focus and precision. One mistake meant death. That, paired with its brief campaign and minimalist storytelling, made it hard to market in an era when players wanted epic length and narrative depth. Still, its visuals, pacing, and sound design make it one of the most cinematic shooters ever made. It told its story through destruction, rhythm, and scale. Einhander was a blockbuster trapped in the body of an arcade game, waiting for an audience that would only appear years later. When Tomba arrived on the PlayStation in 1998, it should have been a hit. It had vibrant art, tight platforming, and a world full of humor and heart. But in a market obsessed with 3D realism and cinematic polish, its cartoonish style made it look like a relic from another era. It sold poorly, disappeared quickly, and became one of the PS1's rarest games. Yet beneath that colorful exterior lies one of the most inventive, charming, and forward-thinking platformers ever made. A true masterpiece that only time could vindicate. You play as a wild, pink-haired boy on a quest to recover his stolen bracelet from evil pigs. It sounds like a simple children's game, but the design was anything but simple. It blended 2D platforming with RPG-style quests and exploration, letting you revisit areas as new paths and secrets opened up. Every region is bursting with personality. Lush jungles, haunted mines, ancient ruins, each drawn in gorgeous hand-painted backgrounds that feel alive. The camera work, though subtle, enhances this cinematic energy. It pans dynamically when you shift planes, giving the world depth and movement that most platformers lacked. What makes it truly special is how it treats curiosity. The game constantly rewards exploration with side stories and quirky characters, from talking frogs to cowardly pigs. It's episodic and emotional, feeling almost like a whimsical animated adventure film. The tone strikes a balance between comedy and melancholy, using bright visuals to mask surprisingly mature themes of greed, corruption, and restoration. Even the soundtrack carries that bittersweet mood. But its late release, limited marketing, and 2D visuals made it look outdated next to 3D giants like Crash Bandicoot and Spyro. But its depth, pacing, and emotional intelligence have aged far better than most of its flashier peers. Tomba is the kind of game that reminds you why creativity matters more than conformity. Bushido Blade is what happens when a game chooses realism over spectacle and pays the price for it. Released in 1997 by Squaresoft, it looked like a typical 3D fighting game, but it wasn't. There were no health bars, no timers, no combos. One clean strike could end a match instantly. Instead of speed and flash, it was about patience, precision, and philosophy. It flopped commercially, but its influence still echoes through modern fighting games and cinematic design alike. What audiences saw as bare bones was, in truth, one of the boldest creative risks of the PS1 era. The concept was deceptively simple. 2 warriors, 1 duel, 1 cut to victory or death. There's no soundtrack blaring over the fight, just the wind, the clatter of swords, and your own heartbeat. The tension is unbearable, like a scene out of samurai film by Kurosawa. Each movement matters. Each stance feels deliberate. A single mistake can end everything in a flash. It's not about reflexes, it's about discipline. That stillness, that anticipation, is Bushido Blade's greatest triumph. Its cinematic quality comes from restraint. Battles take place in open environments, castles, forests, moonlit courtyards, each drenched in atmosphere. The camera follows gracefully, framing the duel like an intimate standoff. When a blade connects, there's no exaggerated explosion or slow-motion effect. Just a thud, a collapse, and silence. It's brutal, poetic, and eerily beautiful. The game even enforces honor. Attacking from behind or striking a fallen opponent can end your playthrough in shame. But that same purity made it a hard sell. Players wanted fireworks, not philosophy. Critics called it too quiet, too empty, missing that its emptiness was the point. It wasn't trying to entertain, it was trying to immerse. It wasn't about who won, but how they fought. Over time, Bushido Blade has become a cult legend, and its DNA lives on in everything from Sekiro to indie dueling sims that chase its meditative tone. When Wild Arms released in 1996, it was overshadowed almost immediately. Final Fantasy VII arrived just months later, stealing the spotlight and defining what RPG should look like. But this didn't deserve to be forgotten. Beneath its traditional surface lay a game full of creativity, atmosphere, and heart. It was an emotional Western fantasy hybrid with one of the best soundtracks of the era, and a story that felt cinematic long before RPGs were being compared to movies. It flopped in the mainstream, but among those who played it, it became legendary. Wild Arms mixes classic fantasy elements with Wild West grit. A world of drifters, revolvers, and ruins filled with ancient technology. It opens with one of the most iconic intros in PS1 history. A sweeping anime-style sequence paired with an unforgettable whistled theme. That single minute captures everything the game stands for. Loneliness, hope, and adventure under an endless sky. It's pure cinematic tone setting, the kind that hooks you emotionally before you've even pressed start. The storytelling is subtle but powerful. 3 protagonists, Rudy, Jack, and Cecilia, each bring their own arcs of loss and redemption. Instead of grandiose battles for destiny, it focuses on emotion. The script is simple, but the direction elevates it. The use of framing in key cutscenes, the timing of its music cues, and the haunting quiet between major moments all given maturity rarely seen in RPGs of the time. Gameplay-wise, it balanced puzzles, turn-based combat, and exploration with remarkable polish. The world felt ancient and lonely, its ruins telling stories of civilizations lost to time. The soundtrack filled with harmonicas, acoustic guitars, and sweeping orchestral flourishes gave every moment the gravity of a Western epic. It never reached the heights of Final Fantasy in sales, but it never needed to. Like a forgotten film reel, it waits patiently to be rediscovered, ready to move anyone willing to listen. When A Misadventures of Tron Bonne released in 2000, hardly anyone noticed. It was a spin-off of Mega Man Legends, a cult series itself, and by the time it launched, the PS2 was already stealing the spotlight. But those who did play it discovered something special. A charming, funny, and surprisingly heartfelt adventure that blended genres like few games ever had. It wasn't just another platformer. It was part strategy, part puzzle, part heist movie. This was bursting with personality, wit, and warmth, even as it failed to sell. You play as Tron Bonne, an anti-hero with brains, attitude, and an army of adorable servbots. Instead of saving the world, you're pulling off elaborate robberies to pay off your family's debt. A premise that feels straight out of a comedic anime film. The game hops between styles. Third-person action, base management, puzzle solving, and even dungeon crawling. Somehow, it all flows together naturally, tied by its colorful tone and lovable cast. The servbots, each with their own quirks, bring genuine humor and charm to every mission. It's hard not to smile when one proudly reports a job well done or bursts into tears after failing. Visually, it was cinematic in its framing and pacing. The cel-shaded style, expressive animations, and snappy camera transitions made every scene feel alive. Dialogue exchanges played like episodes of a Saturday morning cartoon, but with the heart of a clever heist film. The soundtrack added to the mood, full of upbeat brass and mischievous energy that matched Tron's chaotic brilliance. But commercially, it never stood chance. A spin-off without Mega Man in the title, released late in the console's life, and printed in extremely limited quantities, it was doomed from start. Yet today, it's one of Capcom's most creative projects, and one of the rarest PS1 gems. Beneath its cheerful surface lies a story about loyalty and ambition, told with warmth and humor.
Get out of here before the police show up!
At first glance, Heart of Darkness looks like a simple side-scrolling platformer, a boy rescuing his dog from shadow creatures. But spend 5 minutes with it, and you'll realize it's something else entirely. a cinematic masterpiece trapped in the wrong decade. Developed by French studio Amazing Studio and released in 1998 after 6 long years in development, it was meant to redefine what storytelling in games could be. Unfortunately, it arrived just as 3D gaming took over, making its 2D style feel old overnight. Critics praised its visuals but shrugged at its design, and players moved on. Yet Heart of Darkness endures as one of the most visually stunning, emotionally rich games of its era. The presentation is breathtaking even today. Fully hand-drawn animation, dynamic lighting, and movie-like cutscenes. The opening alone, complete with orchestral music, dramatic camera angles, and expressive characters, sets the stage for something cinematic. The story follows Andy, a young boy who ventures into a shadowy world to save his dog, Whiskey, from the forces of darkness. What follows is part fantasy adventure, part childhood nightmare, and entirely captivating. Gameplay blends puzzle platforming with environmental storytelling. The game communicates emotion through animation rather than dialogue. Fear, triumph, confusion, all conveyed with a few gestures. Every death, and there are many, feels like a moment in a dark fairy tale, frightening yet beautiful. The tone shifts between wonder and terror so smoothly it feels directed, not coded. So why did it flop? Timing. By 1998, players wanted polygons and open worlds, not cinematic 2D adventures. Its development costs were massive, and its marketing was nearly non-existent. But time has been kind to Heart of Darkness. Modern players see what critics missed. It was an animated film you happened to play long before that idea was cool.